had watched wars for 40 years. He had seen the burn entire worlds. He had watched the tear through colonies like storms of blade and fury. He had documented the cold precision of the and the savage hunger of the. In 4 decades of service to the Galactic Council, he had believed himself immune to surprise. He had believed he had seen everything that war could offer. He was wrong. The assignment came through standard channels. The Galactic Council wanted an assessment of the species to achieve. Humans, they were called. A young race from a small world on the edge of known space. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were generations behind what most species considered baseline. The Council wanted to know if they posed any threat to the established order. Accepted the assignment without much interest. His people, though, were known throughout the galaxy as the finest analysts of conflict. They did not fight themselves. They watched. They recorded. They calculated. They told other species what their enemies would do before those enemies knew themselves. It was a useful skill, and it had kept the safe for 10,000 years. He traveled to the border world of Nexus 7 aboard his observation vessel, the Quiet Shadow. The ship was designed for exactly this kind of work. It could watch battles from orbit without being detected. It could intercept communications, track movements, and record everything that happened on a battlefield with perfect clarity. When he arrived, the situation was already desperate. A human garrison of 300 soldiers had been defending a mining colony for 6 days. They had come in force, nearly 3,000 raiders looking for slaves and resources. The mathematics were simple. The humans were outnumbered 10 to 1. They had no heavy weapons, no air support, and no reinforcements coming. By every calculation knew they should have been dead already. They were not dead. He watched from orbit as the humans held their defensive line against wave after wave of assault. They fought from behind hastily constructed barricades. They fought from rooftops and windows and narrow streets. They fought with weapons that should have been outclassed by everything the brought against them. And they did not retreat, not once, not a single step backward. Found this puzzling. He ran the calculations again. The humans had to know their position was hopeless. They had to understand that reinforcements were too far away to save them. Any rational species would have begun evacuation procedures. Any rational species would have negotiated for terms. Any rational species would have accepted the reality of the situation and acted accordingly. The humans did not seem to care about reality. By nightfall on the first day of his observation had recorded over 200 separate engagements. The humans had lost 47 soldiers. They had lost nearly 400. The ratio was absurd. It should not have been possible. Yet there it was in his data, undeniable and inexplicable. He began monitoring human communications, hopping to understand their tactics. What he heard confused him even more. They were laughing. In the middle of a siege that should have broken their spirits, the humans were making jokes. They were teasing each other about missed shots. They were complaining about the food in their rations. They were placing bets on who would kill more enemies the next day. A woman named Lisa Grant was particularly notable. She commanded a squad of 12 soldiers defending the eastern approach to the colony. Her sector had seen the heaviest fighting all day. She had lost 3 of her people. By every measure knew she should have been exhausted and afraid. Instead, she was arguing with a soldier named Danny Cole about who had disabled more vehicles during the last assault. Cole insisted he had gotten 4. Grant claimed she had gotten 5, including one that Cole was trying to take credit for. The argument went on for several minutes, complete with witnesses being called to testify and elaborate insults being exchanged. Then they attacked again, and both of them stopped talking and started killing with the same casual efficiency they had shown all day. Marked this behavior in his notes. He labeled it aberrant. He assumed it was some kind of stress response, a psychological defense mechanism to cope with the horror of their situation. He had seen similar behaviors in other species, though never to this degree. He did not understand yet. He did not understand that he was not watching a defense mechanism. He was watching something fundamental to what humans were. He was watching the thing that made them different from every other species he had ever observed. The night brought no rest for the garrison. They probed their lines constantly, testing for weaknesses, wearing down the defenders through exhaustion. Watched human soldiers fight for hours, grab a few minutes of sleep, and then return to the line as if they had rested for days. Their commander was a man named Sam Turner. He was not physically impressive. He was of average height and build, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that spoke of age and experience. He moved through the colony all night, checking on his soldiers, adjusting positions, making sure everyone had ammunition and water. Intercepted a communication between Turner and the colony's civilian administrator. The administrator wanted to know if they should prepare for evacuation. Turner's response was calm and certain. "We are not leaving," he said. "This is our colony, these are our people, the want to take them for slaves, that is not going to happen." "But the numbers," the administrator protested. "Surely you can see that we cannot win this fight." Turner was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had not changed at all. "I have seen the numbers," he said. "I do not care about the numbers. I care about the 300 children in this colony who are counting on us to keep them safe. I care about the families who built their lives here. I care about the fact that if we run, they will hunt us down anyway. So we are not running. We are fighting, and we are going to win." The administrator did not argue further. Recorded the conversation and added it to his analysis. He noted that Turner's confidence was not supported by any tactical reality. He noted that the commander seemed to believe victory was possible despite all evidence to the contrary. He labeled this as delusion. He was wrong about that too. As dawn approached on the second day, realized that his standard analytical frameworks were failing him. Everything he knew about warfare told him that the humans should have broken by now. Everything he knew about psychology told him that their morale should have collapsed under the weight of their losses and the hopelessness of their situation. Yet there they were, still fighting, still laughing, still refusing to accept what seemed inevitable to everyone watching. Decided to observe more closely. He adjusted his instruments to focus on individual soldiers. He wanted to understand what drove these strange creatures. He wanted to know why they would not simply accept defeat and save themselves. He did not know it yet, but he was about to learn something that would change his understanding of war forever. He was about to learn what real fear felt like. Not fear of death, not fear of violence, fear of a species that did not know when to stop. They attacked at dawn with everything they had. Watched from orbit as siege weapons began pounding the colony's outer walls. These were not the light weapons the raiders had used before. These were heavy plasma cannons, the kind designed to break fortifications that had stood for centuries. The walls of the human colony were not built for this kind of assault. They were mining colony walls, designed to keep out wildlife and weather, not military-grade weaponry. They began to crumble within the first hour. The breach opened on the northern side, a gap wide enough for a dozen to pour through at once. Calculated the implications immediately. The outer perimeter was lost. The humans would need to fall back to the inner defensive line around the central buildings. They would lose a third of their territory and several important supply caches. Their already desperate situation had become almost impossible. He expected to see evacuation orders. He expected to see panic. He expected to see the beginning of the end. Instead, he saw Sam Turner call for volunteers to hold the breach. Every human in the outer sector raised their hand. Did not understand at first. He assumed there had been some miscommunication. He assumed the humans did not realize what they were being asked to do. Holding the breach meant staying behind while everyone else retreated. It meant fighting against overwhelming numbers with no hope of survival. It meant dying so that others could live. The humans understood perfectly. They volunteered anyway. Turner selected 12 soldiers for the task. He chose carefully, picking experienced fighters who knew what they were agreeing to. A sergeant named Bate Murray would lead them. She was a small woman with short dark hair and eyes that seemed too calm for someone who had just been given a death sentence. Intercepted the communication between Turner and Murray. He expected something profound. He expected speeches about duty and sacrifice. He expected the kind of dramatic farewell that his people would have composed for such a moment. Turner simply said, "Buy us 2 hours." Murray replied, "You will get 4. Then she gathered her squad and moved to the breach. The next 6 hours were the most brutal combat had ever witnessed. They poured through the gap in endless waves. They outnumbered the 12 humans by hundreds. They had better weapons, better armor, and the advantage of momentum. None of it mattered. Murray positioned her squad with precision born of years of experience. They used the rubble of the collapsed wall as cover. They created overlapping fields of fire that turned the breach into a killing ground. Every that came through died before they could take 3 steps. The bodies began to pile up. They climbed over their own dead to reach the humans. They died on top of the ones who had fallen before them. The breach became a mountain of corpses, and still the humans kept firing. In the third hour, a warrior got close enough to strike Murray with a blade. Watched in horror as the weapon took her left arm off just below the elbow. Blood sprayed across the broken stones. Any other soldier of any other species would have fallen. Any other soldier would have screamed for a medic and retreated from the line. Murray did not fall. She did not scream. She looked at the stump of her arm for exactly 2 seconds. Then she picked up her weapon with her remaining hand and shot the who had wounded her 3 times in the face. "I am fine," she said over the radio when one of her squad called out in alarm. "Stay on your positions. We have another 3 hours to hold." She continued fighting. She continued giving orders. She continued killing with the same steady efficiency she had shown before losing her arm. Instruments detected something strange in her vital signs. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. Her breathing was steady. The pain she must have been feeling did not register in her voice or her movements at all. She had simply decided that the pain did not matter, and somehow, impossibly, her body had obeyed. The 4th hour came and went, then the 5th. Murray had promised Turner 4 hours, she gave him 6. When the last of the 12 finally fell, the inner perimeter was fully fortified. The civilians had been moved to the safest locations. The remaining soldiers had redistributed ammunition and supplies. The defense could continue. Reviewed his recordings of the final moments. He watched Murray take 3 separate wounds that should have been fatal. He watched her keep fighting after each one. He watched her finally fall only when her body simply could not function anymore, when there was not enough blood left in her veins to keep her conscious. Her last words, spoken into her radio with a voice that was barely a whisper, were not about fear or regret or anger. "Tell Turner we held," she said. "Tell him it was an honor." Then she died. Not one of the 12 had attempted to retreat. Not one had tried to save themselves when the opportunity arose. In the 5th hour, there had been a brief gap in the assault, a window of perhaps 30 seconds when they could have fallen back to the inner perimeter. None of them had moved. They had used those 30 seconds to reload their weapons and prepare for the next wave. Did not understand. He had seen sacrifice before. He had seen soldiers die for their causes in 100 different wars, but he had never seen anything like this. He had never seen beings who seemed to consider their own survival completely irrelevant to the task at hand. That night, he intercepted communications from the surviving humans. He expected grief. He expected trauma. He expected the kind of psychological collapse that followed such devastating losses in every species he had studied. The humans were telling stories. They gathered in small groups between their defensive positions and they talked about the fallen. They talked about Murray and her squad. They shared memories and jokes and moments from battles past. They laughed at things that should not have been funny. They cried briefly and then stopped crying and went back to laughing. A young soldier named Pete told a story about Murray teaching him to play cards during basic training. She had cheated every single game, and it with complete sincerity every time he caught her. Everyone who listened laughed until they could barely breathe. Then said something that would never forget. "She would want us to keep going," he said. "She would be angry if we gave up now. So we are not giving up. We are going to win this, and then we are going to name the biggest building in this colony after her. And every year on this day, we are going to get drunk and tell stories about her until we cannot stand up anymore." The others agreed. They made promises to the dead. They swore oaths of remembrance and revenge. They did not talk about defeat. They did not talk about the possibility that they might all die tomorrow. They talked about what they would do after they won. Added more notes to his analysis. He marked the humans as psychologically resilient beyond any standard he had ever measured. He noted their ability to process grief while maintaining combat effectiveness. He observed their use of dark humor as a coping mechanism. He still labeled them as irrational. He still believed they were deluding themselves about their chances of survival. But somewhere deep in his analytical mind, a small doubt had begun to form. These humans were not behaving like a species that was losing. They were behaving like a species that had already decided to win. And for the first time in 40 years of watching wars, felt something he could not identify in his data. It felt almost like fear. On the 4th day of the siege, the commander offered terms. Intercepted the transmission as it came through. The spoke in the harsh, guttural tones of their species, but the translation was clear enough. Surrender the colony. Hand over the civilians. The human soldiers would be allowed to leave with their lives. They would be given safe passage to the edge of the system and permitted to call for evacuation. It was a generous offer by standards. They rarely offered anything to their enemies except death. The fact that they were willing to negotiate at all spoke to how much damage the humans had inflicted over the past 4 days. Calculated the strategic implications. The humans had lost nearly half their garrison. They were down to 160 soldiers. Their ammunition was running dangerously low. Their defensive perimeter had shrunk to a small cluster of buildings in the center of the colony. By any rational measure, they should accept the terms. Sam Turner's response was broadcast on an open channel so that everyone in the system could hear it. He suggested that the commander perform a physically impossible act upon himself. He used language so crude that translators struggled to find appropriate equivalents. He questioned the commander's ancestry, his intelligence, and his personal hygiene in terms that left no room for diplomatic interpretation. Then his voice changed. It became quieter, colder, more dangerous. "The children in this colony have been asking me when they can go outside again," Turner said. "They want to play in the fields and look at the stars and do all the things that children should be able to do. I promised them it would be soon. I do not break promises to children, so you can take your offer and you can choke on it. We are not surrendering. We are not handing anyone over to slavers. And when this is finished, I am going to find your body on the battlefield, and I am going to make sure every one of those children gets a chance to spit on it." The commander did not respond. Sat in his observation chamber and stared at his instruments for a long time. He ran the calculations again. He checked his data. He tried to find some rational explanation for what he had just witnessed. There was none. The humans could not win this fight. Turner had to know that. Every soldier in that colony had to know that. The mathematics were brutally simple. They did not have enough people. They did not have enough weapons. They did not have enough time. Yet they fought as if victory was certain. He began monitoring individual soldiers more closely, trying to understand what drove them. He focused his instruments on Pete, the young man who had told stories about Bate Murray the night before, was barely 20 standard years old. He had been wounded twice in the fighting. He had watched friends die in front of him. By every psychological model knew he should have been broken. Was not broken. During a brief rest period between assaults, watched him sit down against a wall and pull out a small electronic device. He was writing something. The observation systems were sensitive enough to read the words as typed them. It was a letter to his mother. "Dear Mom," wrote, "I hope this finds you well. Things here are a little rough, but we are holding together. The food is terrible as always, but the company is good. I have made some real friends. You would like them." Noted that did not mention the siege. He did not mention the hundreds of trying to kill him. He did not mention the friends he had already lost or the very real possibility that he would be dead within hours. "I know you worry about me," continued. "You have always worried about me ever since I was little. I want you to know that you do not need to worry. I am exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I am supposed to be doing. I am proud to be here. I am proud to be defending these people, and I am proud to be your son." The letter went on for several more paragraphs, talked about mundane things. He asked about his sister's new baby. He mentioned a book he was reading during his off hours. He made a joke about a card game he had lost to one of his. He signed it, "Your loving son, Pete." Then he saved the letter and put the device away. The next assault came 20 minutes later. Watched return to his position and fight with the same calm efficiency he had shown for 4 days. The young human moved through the chaos of battle like he had been doing it his entire life. He called out targets to his. He dragged a wounded soldier to cover while under fire. He killed 14 in a single engagement, his weapon never wavering, his aim never faltering. Then in a brief moment of calm, saw him smile. It was not a smile of joy or triumph. It was something else, something peaceful, something that said this human had found exactly where he belonged in the universe and was content with what he had found, even if it killed him. Analytical frameworks finally collapsed. He had spent 40 years studying war. He had built models and theories and predictive algorithms based on the behavior of over 200 species. He had believed he understood the fundamental nature of conflict. He had believed he could predict how any species would react to any situation. He had been wrong about humans from the very beginning. These creatures did not calculate odds. They did not weigh costs against benefits. They did not make rational decisions based on the probability of survival. They simply decided what mattered to them, and then they refused to stop until they had achieved it or died trying. It was not courage in the way had always understood courage. Courage was acting despite fear. These humans did not seem to feel fear at all, or if they did, they had simply chosen to ignore it so completely that it might as well not exist. It was not fanaticism either. Had seen fanatics before. Fanatics were driven by ideology, by belief systems that overrode their survival instincts. These humans were not fighting for an ideology. They were fighting for each other. They were fighting for the children in the colony who wanted to play outside. They were fighting for the mothers back home who would receive letters from sons who might already be dead. It was something else. Something did not have a word for in any of the 200 languages he spoke. That night, as the colony fell silent and the humans prepared for another day of desperate defense, began rewriting his entire report. He deleted his predictions of inevitable defeat. He removed his calculations of probable surrender timelines. He started over from the beginning. He did not know yet how the siege would end. He did not know if the humans would win or lose, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, these humans would not stop fighting until their hearts stopped beating. And for reasons he could not fully explain, that thought terrified him. On the 6th day, Sam Turner did something that no analyst in the galaxy would have predicted. He attacked. Had been preparing his instruments for another day of defensive observation. He had calculated the rate of ammunition depletion, the declining number of combat-effective soldiers, the shrinking perimeter. Everything in his data pointed toward a final stand within the next 48 hours. The humans would hold as long as they could, and then they would die. Instead, at 3 hours past midnight, 60 human soldiers left the colony under cover of darkness. They moved in silence through the ruined streets of the outer perimeter. They slipped past patrols without being detected. They crossed the no-man's land between the defensive line and the enemy camp like ghosts, invisible and deadly. Could not understand what he was seeing. The humans were attacking with less than half their remaining force. They were leaving the colony defended by only 33 soldiers, a number that could barely hold the inner perimeter against a serious assault. If they discovered what was happening and launched an attack, the colony would fall within hours. It made no tactical sense. It violated every principle of defensive warfare that had ever studied. It was, by any rational measure, an act of complete madness. It was also working. The humans reached the camp before dawn. They had identified the command structure during 6 days of careful observation. They knew where the commander slept. They knew where the communications equipment was located. They knew which tents held the officers and which held the common soldiers. And they had come to kill them all. The first died without making a sound. A human soldier named Cross cut his throat from behind and lowered his body to the ground before anyone could notice. She was a small woman, shorter than most of her comrades, but she moved with a fluid grace that spoke of years of training. Her face showed no emotion at all as she cleaned her blade and moved to the next target. The killing spread through the camp like a disease. Watched humans take down warriors who were twice their size. They used knives and hands and improvised weapons. They killed quietly when they could and loudly when they had to. They moved in pairs and small groups, covering each other, communicating with hand signals and brief whispers. Danny Cole, the same soldier who had joked about vehicle kills with Lisa Grant on the first day, fought his way through a tent full of officers with nothing but a combat knife and a pistol. He took a wound to his side in the fighting but did not slow down. When his pistol ran empty, he threw it at his face and used the distraction to close the distance and cut the warrior's throat. Then he picked up a weapon and kept going. His hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of his observation console and tried to steady himself, but the trembling would not stop. He had watched 200 species make war. He had seen brutality and savagery and cruelty beyond imagining. None of it had ever affected him like this. These humans were not just fighting, they were hunting. They began to wake to the reality of what was happening. Alarms spread through the camp. Warriors grabbed their weapons and rushed toward the sounds of combat. They expected to find a raid, a quick strike that would withdraw as soon as it met resistance. Instead, they found humans who had no intention of leaving. The battle turned from infiltration to open combat, and the humans did not falter. They fought in the tight spaces between tents and vehicles with a ferocity that explanation. They took wounds that should have dropped them and kept fighting. They ran out of ammunition and picked up enemy weapons. They broke their weapons and fought with their hands. A young soldier named Mark Hayes got separated from his squad in the chaos. Three cornered him against a supply vehicle. He had no weapon left. He was bleeding from wounds on his arm and leg. By every calculation, he should have been dead in seconds. Hayes grabbed a piece of metal debris from the ground and charged them. He killed one with the improvised weapon before the other two could react. He used the body as a shield while he took the dead warrior's blade. Then he killed the second with a strike so fast that instruments barely captured it. The third turned to run. Hayes caught him before he got 3 steps. By the time the first light of dawn touched the camp, the humans had reached the command center. Turner himself led the final push through the commander's personal guards. He was wounded in 3 places. His left arm hung useless at his side. Blood covered half his face from a cut above his eye. He did not seem to notice any of it. The commander was waiting inside with his personal guard, the last line of defense for the leader of nearly 3,000 raiders. They outnumbered the remaining humans 4-1. They had better weapons and fresh bodies, and the advantage of a defensive position. None of it mattered. Turner walked into that command center like he was walking into his own home. He killed the first guard with a burst from his rifle, the second with a knife that appeared in his hand from nowhere. His soldiers poured in behind him, each one fighting with the same terrifying intensity. The commander died with a human knife in his throat. His final expression was one of complete incomprehension. He had fought against 100 different species. He had conquered worlds and enslaved millions. He had believed himself untouchable. He had never faced humans before. Watched the recording of that moment a dozen times. He studied the look on the commander's face in his final seconds. It was not pain. It was not anger. It was confusion. Pure, overwhelming confusion. He had not understood what was happening to him. He had not understood how these small, fragile, primitive creatures had torn through his army like it was made of paper. He had not understood why they would not just surrender and save themselves. He had died without ever understanding. The force, suddenly leaderless, began to fragment. Word spread through the camp that the commander was dead. Warriors who had been preparing to counterattack stopped and looked at each other in confusion. Some tried to rally around surviving officers. Others began to retreat. A few simply dropped their weapons and fled. By midday, the siege was broken. Sat in his observation chamber and stared at nothing. His instruments recorded everything automatically, but he had stopped watching. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but something else had taken the place of the trembling. He was afraid. Not of the battle, not of death or violence or any of the things that should have frightened a being who had spent his life studying war. He was afraid of humans. He had seen 200 species make war. He had seen them fight for territory and resources and ideology and revenge. He had seen them calculate odds and make rational decisions and accept defeat when defeat was inevitable. He had never seen anything like this. He had never seen a species that became more dangerous as their situation grew more desperate. He had never seen soldiers who treated their own survival as completely irrelevant to victory. He had never seen warriors who could switch from jokes and laughter to cold, efficient killing without any transition at all. The humans had won. 51 of the 60 who had attacked the camp were still alive. They had killed nearly 1,000 in a single night. They had destroyed the command structure of an army 10 times their size. And as they walked back to the colony in the morning light, heard them laughing again. They were making jokes about the battle. They were complaining about being hungry. They were already talking about which stories they would tell when they got home. They had just done the impossible, and they treated it like it was just another day at work. That was when finally understood what he was dealing with. That was when he knew that his report to the council would be unlike anything he had ever written before. These humans were not just another species to be and analyzed. They were something new, something terrifying, something that the galaxy was not ready for. The siege of Nexus 7 ended on the 7th day. Human reinforcements arrived in orbit to find the colony intact, the raiders scattered across 3 systems, and 51 soldiers still standing from an original garrison of 300. They found a field of bodies stretching from the colony walls to the ruined enemy camp. They found civilians who had spent a week hiding in basements and bunkers, emerging into sunlight with tears on their faces and disbelief in their eyes. They found Sam Turner standing at the main gate, his wounds bandaged but untreated, refusing to leave his post until he had personally shaken the hand of every soldier who came to relieve him. Watch the reunion from orbit. He recorded the embraces between soldiers who had given up hope and soldiers who had come to save them. He documented the moment when Turner finally allowed the medics to examine him, and they discovered he had been fighting for 3 days with 4 broken ribs and internal bleeding that should have killed him. He added all of it to his report. 3 weeks later, stood before the Galactic Council on his. The chamber was vast, designed to accommodate representatives from over 300 species. They had gathered to hear his assessment of humanity, to learn whether this new species posed a threat to the established order of the galaxy. They expected data. They expected analysis. They expected the dry, precise evaluation that had provided for 10,000 years. Gave them something else. He told them about Bate Murray, who lost her arm in the 3rd hour and kept fighting for 3 more. He told them how she had refused to retreat even when retreat became possible. He told them her last words were not about fear or pain, but about honor. He told them about Pete, who wrote letters to his mother between battles, who talked about terrible food and good company while his friends died around him. He told them how it smiled in the middle of combat, not from joy, but from peace, from the certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. He told them about Lisa Grant and Danny Cole, who made bets about kill counts while under siege, who turned survival into a game because games were how humans kept themselves sane. He told them about Cross, who moved through the camp like death itself, silent and unstoppable and utterly without mercy. He told them about Sam Turner, who rejected surrender with language so crude that translators still struggled with it, who promised children they would play outside soon and then made sure that promise was kept, who led an impossible counterattack with broken ribs and dying organs because that was what needed to be done. The council listened in silence, then gave them his assessment. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the most advanced. Their technology was primitive. Their bodies were fragile. They were short. On any objective measure, they should have been unremarkable. But humans did not fight on objective measures. They fought with something that had never encountered before. The humans called it different things: heart, spirit, guts, will. The words did not translate properly into any other language because no other species had a concept that matched it exactly. It was not courage, though it looked like courage. Courage was acting despite fear. Humans in combat seemed to exist in a state beyond fear, where the possibility of death simply did not register as a factor in their decisions. It was not fanaticism, though it looked like fanaticism. Fanatics fought for ideas. Humans fought for each other. They fought for the soldier next to them, for the family waiting at home, for the children who wanted to play outside. They fought for things that were small and personal and impossibly precious. It was not madness, though it looked like madness. Madness was irrational. Humans in combat were terrifyingly rational. They calculated odds and made plans and executed tactics with precision. They simply refused to accept that unfavorable odds meant defeat. Told the council that he had watched 200 species make war over 40 years. He told them he had believed himself immune to surprise. He told them he had been wrong. Humans in combat had taught him what real fear was. Not fear of death, not fear of pain, fear of a species that did not know when to quit, fear of warriors who became more dangerous as they lost ground, fear of soldiers who laughed at death and then killed it when it came for them. His recommendation was simple. Do not make enemies of the humans. Do not threaten what they love. Do not give them a reason to fight. Do not underestimate them because their technology is primitive or their bodies are fragile or they are short. Because humans do not calculate odds. They do not accept defeat. They do not stop until they have won or they are dead. And sometimes said, remembering Bate Murray fighting with one arm, remembering Sam Turner leading a charge with broken ribs, remembering 51 soldiers walking out of a siege that should have killed them all. Sometimes they do not stop even then. The council accepted his report in silence. No one asked questions. No one challenged his conclusions. They simply sat and absorbed what they had heard. Returned to his seat, He knew that he would never observe another war. He had seen enough. He had seen everything he needed to see. One of the council members, an ancient who had lived for over 1,000 years, approached him after the session ended. They had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen empires. He had seen species conquer the stars and others fade into extinction. He asked a simple question. Are you certain about what you saw? Could your instruments have been mistaken? Could the data have been corrupted? Thought about it for a long moment. He thought about Murray's smile as she died. He thought about his letter to his mother. He thought about Turner's crude rejection of surrender and the promise he made to children he had never met. I am certain, he said. The data was not corrupted. My instruments recorded everything accurately. What I saw was real. There was quiet for a long time. Then we are in trouble, he finally said. All of us, every species in this galaxy. We have spent 10,000 years believing that we understood war. We have built empires and alliances and defensive pacts based on that understanding. He looked at with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. And now you tell us that a species has emerged that fights by different rules entirely. A species that does not accept the mathematics of war. A species that makes decisions based on love and loyalty and stubborn refusal to yield. He shook his head slowly. The galaxy will never be the same. Did not disagree. He returned to his ship that night and began the long journey home. He would retire from observation work. He would write academic papers about what he had witnessed. He would try to explain to future generations what it meant when humans went to war. But he knew that his words would never be enough. Some things could not be explained. Some things had to be witnessed. Humans in combat had taught him what real fear was. And he would carry that fear with him for the rest of his life.